This place right here, the skull between my ears, that is a bad neighborhood. And I should not be in there alone. I can't be in there by
What
myself.
are you talking about? It's
It's insane.
crazy, man.
It's crazy in here. This is a bad place for me to be by myself.
Some voices don't just sing. They scream for you when you can't scream yourself. For millions of kids in the early 2000s, that was Chester Bennington. The high, crystalline tenor that could soar into a scream like a lightning bolt, breaking through headphones and car stereos, made him the perfect frontman for Linkin Park, a band that fused rap, rock, and electronic sound into something entirely new. But behind that voice was a man scarred by trauma, haunted by depression, and weighed down by addiction. He gave his fans words when they had none. He gave them strength when they felt weak. He gave them hope when they felt hopeless. Yet tragically, he could not always find that same hope for himself. On July 20th, 2017, Chester Bennington died by suicide. It was the birthday of his close friend, Soundgarden's Cornell, who himself had died only 2 months earlier. The coincidence wasn't lost on anyone, and it shook the music world to its core. Today, we're telling the story of Chester Bennington, the boy from Arizona who became the voice of a generation, the reluctant icon of nu metal, and the man whose music saved millions, even as he lost himself. Chester Charles Bennington was born March 20th, 1976, in Phoenix, Arizona. From the outside, his childhood seemed ordinary, but behind closed doors, it was anything but. Beginning around the age of 7, Chester was sexually abused by an older male friend. He carried the secret for years, feeling ashamed and powerless. On top of that, his parents' divorce when he was 11 fractured what little stability he had left. The combination was devastating. As a teenager, Chester turned to drugs and alcohol. Cocaine, methamphetamine, marijuana, pills, anything that could quiet the chaos inside. He later described this period as one of deep self-destruction, but also admitted it was the only way he knew how to cope. What saved him, what kept him tethered, was music. Chester was obsessed with sound. He fell under the spell of Depeche Mode's brooding synths, the soaring grit of Stone Temple Pilots, and the hypnotic blend of heavy guitars wrapped in haunting melody. He wasn't just a listener. He was a student. He scribbled lyrics in worn notebooks, sketching out fragments of pain and hope, trying to make sense of the storms inside his head. He fronted local bands like Grey Days, cutting his teeth in small clubs, learning how to command a room even when that room only held a handful of people. Meanwhile, in Southern California, a small band called Zero was struggling to break through. The group, featuring Mike Shinoda, Brad Delson, Rob Borden, Joe Hahn, and Dave Phoenix Farrell, had talent, but they needed a frontman who could bridge rap and rock with emotional fire. In 1999, an industry rep named Jeff Blue sent them a demo tape from a young singer in Arizona. Chester had recorded it in a single day, pouring every ounce of his soul into the audition. When the band heard it, they knew immediately. This was their missing piece. Chester moved to California and the band renamed themselves Hybrid Theory. They recorded an EP under that name in 1999, but soon ran into legal issues with another group of the same name. So they changed again, settling on Linkin Park, a stylized spelling of Linkin Park, a nod to a Los Angeles landmark, and conveniently, a name they could register as a domain. Their debut album kept the old moniker as a title, Hybrid Theory, and in October 2000, it would change everything. Hybrid Theory wasn't just an album, it was a cultural detonation, fueled by tracks like Crawling, Papercut, One Step Closer, and in the end, it gave a language to a generation drowning in chaos. The lyrics weren't abstract poetry, they were raw wounds set to rhythm. Crawling in my skin, these wounds they will not heal. The whole album was amazing, for me personally. In the end, still takes me back to a place I didn't want to be. That song said what I felt, but didn't know how to cope in a healthy way at the time. That song was my therapy in a way. For teenagers dealing with broken homes, bullying, addiction, or depression, Chester wasn't just singing to them. He was singing for them. His scream was their scream. His pain was their release. Commercially, Hybrid Theory became one of the best-selling albums of the 21st century. It sold around 27 million copies worldwide and is certified 12 times platinum in the US by the RIAA. It remains Linkin Park's biggest record and one of the defining albums of the nu metal era. But Chester himself? He still felt like the broken kid from Arizona, trying to hold it together. As Linkin Park rocketed to superstardom, Chester's internal battles didn't disappear. Fame is a magnifying glass. It doesn't fix your pain, it just makes it harder to hide. Chester spoke openly about his struggles with depression and addiction. He called himself a raging alcoholic in interviews and admitted he sometimes feared being left alone with his thoughts. In early 2017, just months before his death, he gave an interview where he described his mind as a dangerous place.
The skull between my ears, that is a bad neighborhood, and I should not be in there alone.
It was a chillingly honest description of what it feels like to live with relentless mental illness. Linkin Park didn't fade after Hybrid Theory. Their 2003 follow-up, Meteora, cemented their status as the world's biggest rock band. Songs like Numb, Faint, Breaking the Habit, and Somewhere I Belong became generational anthems. The album has sold over 16 million copies worldwide and is certified 8 times platinum in the US. By 2004, the band experimented with collaboration, joining forces with Jay-Z for the Collision Course EP. It debuted at #1 and produced Numb Encore, a hybrid track that won a Grammy for Best Rap Sung Collaboration. In 2007, they released Minutes to Midnight, an album that pushed into more alternative rock and political themes. While some fans resisted the change, Chester's voice remained the emotional anchor, guiding listeners through every stylistic shift. Behind the music, Chester was known by friends and bandmates as warm, generous, and deeply empathetic. He was a jokester, a family man, and someone who cared deeply about people. But that kindness existed alongside fragility. Chester's sobriety was a constant battle. At times he maintained it, at other times he relapsed. Those closest to him described his relationship with drugs and alcohol as a fight that sometimes had to be won hour by hour. That vulnerability was exactly what fans connected to. He wasn't a distant rock god. He was one of them, just louder. One of Chester's closest friends in the industry was Cornell, the legendary Soundgarden and Audioslave frontman. They bonded over music, fatherhood, and their shared struggles with addiction and depression. When Cornell died by suicide on May 18, 2017, Chester was devastated. At Chris's funeral, he performed Hallelujah, his voice breaking as he sang through tears. The performance was gut-wrenching. It showed the full depth of his grief, but it also revealed something darker, a reflection of his own inner battles. He had written an open letter to Chris days earlier, calling him his inspiration, and admitting he couldn't imagine a world without him. For fans and loved ones, the letter read like a farewell, and in hindsight, it was chilling. In the aftermath of Cornell's passing, Chester tried to keep moving forward. He leaned on his family, who remained his anchor. In the weeks before his death, Chester spent time with his wife, Talinda, and their children at a cabin in Sedona, Arizona. To his kids, those days felt almost normal. There were hikes, swims, and silly moments that captured the father who always found joy in making them laugh. Friends would later recall how devoted he was to fatherhood, how he longed to give his children the stability and love he never had growing up. Those quiet family moments stood in stark contrast to the chaos swirling in his head. At the same time, he was still immersed in music. In studio sessions, Chester seemed focused, even excited. Mike Shinoda visited him not long before his passing, and they spent hours trading ideas, tossing around melodies, and joking like the brothers they were. Chester introduced Shinoda to the indie poet and rapper Watsky, and the three spent the day riffing creatively, sketching plans for the future. To everyone in that room, it felt like a good day, a hopeful day. Chester wasn't withdrawn. He was present, engaged, even enthusiastic. It was moments like this that made his eventual death so shocking. Publicly, he seemed to be doing well. Photographs taken in early July show him smiling with his family. In one post from July 14th, just 6 days before he died, Chester wrote, "This is probably the greatest day of my life." The image shows him laughing, radiating happiness. And in family photos taken the day before his death, he looked content and relaxed, like a man enjoying his summer, not one teetering on the edge of tragedy. But appearances can deceive, and addiction rarely announces itself in neat, predictable ways. Behind the smiles, Chester was still fighting. Friends later revealed that in his final months, his relationship with alcohol had become more severe. Sobriety, which he had worked so hard to protect, was slipping. He described it as an hour-by-hour battle, a relentless tug of war. He was often too exhausted to win. His autopsy revealed that there was alcohol in his system when he died. Police at the scene noted an empty bottle of Stella Artois and a half-full glass of Corona in the home. Quiet, ordinary objects that carried extraordinary weight. The duality of Chester's final days is what makes them so haunting. On one side, there was joy. Vacations with family, studio sessions alive with creative energy, and photos that seemed to capture a man who had rediscovered peace. On the other side was a darkness that had stalked him since childhood, a tide of trauma and depression that no amount of fame, love, or accomplishment could fully hold back. It was as if he was living in two worlds at once, the one he showed and the one he fought alone. Then came July 20th, 2017. The date already carried heavy meaning. It would have been Chris Cornell's 53rd birthday. For Chester, who had been so broken by his friend's passing, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. That morning, he followed the same tragic path. He was just 41 years old. News of his death spread like wildfire. Fans gathered outside his home in California, leaving flowers, candles, and handwritten notes. Vigils appeared overnight in cities across the globe, from Los Angeles to Tokyo, from Mexico City to Athens. Entire stadiums of fans sang "Numb" and "In the End" together in his memory. The grief was overwhelming, but so was the gratitude. People who had never met Chester poured out stories of how his voice had saved them, how his music had stopped them from ending their own lives, how it had given them words when they couldn't find their own. In the days that followed, Linkin Park's music soared back up the charts. Old albums re-entered the Billboard 200. Songs released decades earlier returned to the Hot 100. But more than the numbers, it was the connection that mattered. The world was speaking his language again, the one he had written out of his own scars. Chester's death on that July morning left behind 6 children, a devoted wife, his bandmates, and millions of grieving fans who still struggle to fill the silence. And yet, even in his absence, his voice continues to echo. Proof that sometimes the things born out of our deepest pain can become someone else's greatest lifeline. The reaction was immediate and global. Fans in cities from Mexico City to Tokyo, from Athens to Los Angeles, organized candlelight vigils, mural paintings, and tribute concerts. On YouTube, fans uploaded covers and montages. On social media, hashtags trended worldwide. For many, it felt like losing not just a rock star, but a friend who had walked with them through their darkest times. Commercially, the numbers told the story too. Linkin Park's entire catalog re-entered the charts. Sales of their music spiked by more than 5,000% in the days after Chester's death. Singles like "Numb" in the End and Heavy returned to the Billboard Hot 100 years after their original release. The world was grieving, loudly, together, and online. Even today, years later, Chester's voice echoes in places he never got to see. Teenagers on TikTok discover "In the End" for the first time, posting videos about how much the lyrics resonate with their struggles. Fans in their 30s and 40s still crank Meteora in the car, transported back to their own angsty adolescence. For millions, Chester didn't just soundtrack their youth, He helped them survive it. And that's his legacy. He made it okay to say you weren't okay. He gave permission to feel, to scream, to break, and to still carry on.